Monkees Pad Episode 2.
What number is this, Chip?
Monkees Pad 2.
Okay, no, I mean, like, don't get excited, man. It's because I'm short, I know.
On the phone, our special guest producer and songwriter, Chip Douglas. Chip, welcome to the Monkees Pad, Episode 2.
Thank you, Joe. Good to be here, and thank you for having me.
We have a little bit of a technical issue today, so Chip isn't going to be able to be on camera. We've got plenty of visual things that we're going to present during our conversation. Chip, you're pretty much, to me, an underdog in the Monkees' career, in that you entered the scene at a very pivotal, controversial moment, and that was when the Monkees were fighting to become their own studio band without any musicians and play the music by themselves. Can you describe to me kind of what that was like at the time, how you entered the picture?
Well, at the time, when Michael Nesmith actually approached me in the Whiskey A Go-Go in whatever year it was, 66 or 7, and asked me to do this, I kind of didn't believe him at first. I thought, well, this sounds like things that only happen to other people and not little old me. And plus, I didn't have the slightest idea how to produce a record. I'd been doing some recording, but I hadn't really, I wasn't really up on what you need to do. And I mentioned that to Nesmith, and he said, well, don't worry, I will teach you everything you need to know, and you can do it. And so I said, okay, well, I'll go along with you, and we'll see where it goes. And eventually told the Turtles that I couldn't stay with the band anymore, and accepted the job, and we got rolling.
Well, that was a pretty bold leap on your part to leave the Turtles, who had just had Happy Together, which to this day is one of the top songs of the 60s. How did you have the gumption to do that? What gave you the confidence to make that big leap?
Well, it was Mike and his reassurance that everything would be fine and I'd be making a handsome living doing this. And so I thought, well, that kind of wins out, doesn't it? I'm always wondering where the rent's going to come from while I was with the Turtles. I mean, we made something like $125 a week for each guy in the band and the Turtles, and it looked like we could do a lot more things, but you know, I had to take a bigger and better opportunity. It just was something I thought, well, and I had a lawyer at the time, and I said, I really don't know what to do. And he said, well, what are you going to do? It's like Don Kirshner described it as, we're offering you a point and a half of the Beatles, buddy. And I said, oh, okay, well, in that case, maybe. And it was, they were selling a lot of records at that time. So I thought, well, this might work out, so I better do it.
Literally, how did you meet the Monkees? What was the first step to getting involved in the project?
Well, I had met Michael Nesmith before he was in the Monkees, and actually we became friends just around the time he was auditioning for the Monkees, and he was and mentioned to me, he says, "Well, if I get this series, everything's going to be wonderful." And so I thought, okay, yeah, well, I'll talk to you later, because we used to see each other at the Troubadour on Monday, hoot night over there. I mean, everybody was in the Troubadour on Monday, hoot night. Anyone who was anyone and who later became famous, and Crosby and Stephen Stills and, Neil Young, and they were all, Dewey Martin, they all hung out at the Troubadour on Monday night. And so anyway, I'd been acquainted with Mike, and so finally, when he came up to me in the whiskey and offered me this tentative position, he said, you can do it, and we'd love to have you on board. And I met the rest of the Monkees after I had, talked to him in the whiskey and said, okay, I'll do it. And then I got introduced to the rest of the guys, and eventually introduced to Don Kirshner, who was in charge of the music at the time. And we had a meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel and exchanged ideas, and it kind of went from there.
Now, was Kirshner happy to meet a producer? I mean, he was juggling 2 or 3 producers. There was Jeff Barry doing work with them. There was Boyce and Hart doing work with them. Did you feel welcome? Did he make you feel like he was looking forward to working with you, or was there any trepidation?
He was unsure of me, I believe. He knew that I had done nothing before, so he had to have had some reservations. But the guys wanted me so bad that and so did the management, Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson. They wanted me involved because the Monkees wanted me involved. But I mean, chiefly Michael wanted me involved, and Mickey was going along with it. Peter was on a different level. He had other ideas for who should be producing their stuff, but Mike was the dominant force and always has been, and kind of convinced them all that no, we need to do this and we need to play our own instruments, and this guy can do it. So there you go. And so in answer to your question about Kirshner, yeah, he wasn't sure that I could do the right thing, and he did assure me at the time in our meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel. He said, certain decisions will have to be made with regard to the fellow's music, and I will be making these decisions. And I said, okay, fine, And then after that, they had further meetings, and I don't know, there's a legendary meeting where Mike put his fist through the wall at the Beverly Hills Hotel. I wasn't there on that one, but, things were kind of blowing up. I remember when Lester Sill first talked to me, I went and had a meeting with him in his office, and he says, well, as you know, there's a war going on right now. I said, really? Yes, between New York and L.A. and Don Kirshner and then the Monkey, and there's a conflict going on. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but let me know if I can do anything for this project. And so we became friends, and that was great. Lester, I worked without him. I don't know what I would have been. I would have had no one to consult with besides the Monkees, but it's always good to have somebody who's in charge of releasing the records that you can talk to about the stuff and say, well, what do you think of this? And what do you think of that? And of course, he suggested songs for me to play for the guys, which I did. And that's how we did it.
So the very first sessions produced, I think the first 2 songs you recorded with the Monkees were All of Your Toys and The Girl I Knew Somewhere. Now, All of Your Toys was written by Bill Martin. Could you tell me a little bit about Bill Martin, who he was on the LA scene at the time, what a type of character he was? Because I've heard so many stories about what a
Well,
unusual person and creative person he was.
he's a very funny and creative guy, he was.
Hello, this is Bill Martin. Wait, let me check my underwear. Yes, this is Bill Martin, writer of such great Monkees tracks as All of Your Toys and etc. And you're listening to John and Paris and John and Headquarters. And hey, what can I say? Get me a lawyer. Get me out of here.
So anyway, that's basically how Bill became involved.
So the song "All of Your Toys," was that demo? Did he come in and play? Did you come and play it for them? How were they introduced to it? Because I guess they fell in love with it because, I mean, I believe it was considered as their third single, wasn't it?
Well, it was something that I thought might be appropriate. It was just the only original song besides what Lester Sill was playing for me. And actually, this was even kind of before Lester began to really submit all these tunes from all the Screen Gems writers to me. So just like All of Your Toys was my buddy Bill's song, and I thought, well, I liked it, and I thought, well, maybe the Monkees could do it. So I played it for the guys, and Bill played it for the guys, and so we did that at Gold Star. But unfortunately, Bill was signed to a publishing company. The song had to be shelved because the thing was Screen Gems had to publish all the things that the Monkees did, which, you know, ruled out any Bob Dylan songs we might want to do or any whatever songs, you know. Only the Screen Gems published stuff was allowed. So poor Bill, you know, it was a great disappointment to him because here he had this song and it was looking pretty good, but, you know, couldn't be released. So I think it's out now, you know, on the Monkees spare parts or whatever they call those things that they released. You know?
Missing links. Yeah, there's I think several volumes of those. But he did get a track with Door into Summer later on the Pisces album.
Yes, we recorded that, and that turned out pretty well.
I think that's an understatement. Yeah, that's an incredible track. I mean, I think it's a fan favorite.
Really? Oh, I'll be darned. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think there's a lot of people out there right now nodding their heads. So what were the first sessions like? I mean, how would you assess the Monkees as musicians? Like, what type of unit were they as far as their ability to record tracks at that point?
Well, they were working at it. I saw one of their live shows and I thought, oh wow, you know, that live they were terrific. But in the studio, it's different. You don't have that excitement of that live audience and that distraction of all that screaming going on, so you can't kind of lose yourself and relax, and you know, it's just different. So it was harder for them in the studio because Mickey was just beginning on the drums and
one more. What
was the matter with that?
Your drum fill.
Me? That wasn't right?
It was a little awkward. It's hard to believe, Mickey, but true. No, it's just, you know, slightly, just a little bit, but we need a good tight start. Okay.
Davy didn't play an instrument then. I wish we had it to do all over again because Davy would have been an ideal rhythm guitar player for a lot of the stuff, and Mike to play lead or whatever. It was a little difficult, and I always like to tell it. I learned how to edit tape in those days, I'll tell you.
She's in love with me. Oh, God. Was it me? Who stayed up? Shit. Once more from the top. You know, you're so...
It was an education for me at the same time. You know, we were working at it, so there you go.
So how did the material for Headquarters come to you? Well, first of all, there's several original songs on there. Mickey wrote one, Mike wrote several, Peter wrote one. How did they demo those to you?
Whoever had a song would just play it on their instrument. Davy, he hadn't started writing yet. We had to find other songs for him. And then along came Harry Nilsson, who I had met before. Days when my group, the Modern Folk Quartet, was rehearsing with Phil Spector, supposedly to have a record released, which never got released in those days, a thing called This Could Be the Night, which was a Harry Nilsson song. But anyway, I met Harry while working, rehearsing every day up at Spector's place. And that's how, when he came wandering into RCA one day, I said, "Oh, hey, I know you, yeah, the guy from, Spector's, and yeah, how you doing?" And so he said, "Yeah, I got songs, and so he played Cuddly Toy, which I thought, oh, well, that'll work."
A David Jones song.
Yeah, I don't really have a title. I guess you could call it the Cuddly Toy song, if you like. Why not? La 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 la. You're not the only cuddly toy that was ever enjoyed by any boy. You're not the only choo-choo train that was left out in the rain the day after Santa came. You're not the only cuddly toy that was ever enjoyed by any boy. Little harmony there. You're not the only choo-choo train that was left out in the rain the day after Santa came. You're not in Booth's eyes.
So he played Cuddly Toy, which I thought, oh, well, that'll work. And Davey said, "That's a good one for me, man, I said, okay, well, let's do that. And so we put a track together, and out came Cuddly Toy. So, and that's how Harry got involved.
Now, Nesmith, kind of at the head of all this, is to step back. Nesmith made a famous interview at the Saturday Evening Post where he basically blew the lid off the fact that, the Monkees weren't playing all the instruments on their records. Were you involved at that point, or?
Well, it was probably just before I came involved, and that frustrated him, and he wanted to have more of a say-so in how things went down and how things were recorded, and how he could express himself in his music. So that's why he turned to me to facilitate this for him, so he could, get somebody who knew his mind and what he wanted and could put it down on tape for him, instead of bucking up against the system and Don and whoever didn't want him to have his independence. They wanted to do the tracks and have the Monkees come in and sing on them, and that was that. Because it was an efficient way of doing things. And I always remember an interview I saw a few years ago of Don Kirshner, and he said, when you get hired to do the music for a project and everything you choose and record goes to number one, I think you do your job. And I said, that's well put. That's exactly what he was doing. But again, it was just for the efficiency of it, in order to get the product out there and get the songs recorded. While the Monkees were filming, somebody else was recording the tracks so that they could just pop in and do the vocals, and that would be that. But, and I'm so grateful to Mike for, calling me on board. They wanted to do their own thing, or Mike did specifically, and everybody else did after a while. And so it became a real labor of love, the Headquarters album. We showed up every morning at 7 o'clock or 7:30 and with coffee and got to work, and we became a band. I felt that there was the option of Mickey would play drums, Peter would play bass, and Mike would play rhythm guitar, and there was a lot of things we could have done that way. But I wanted to, when Peter played the piano in the studio a couple of times, and he could rattle off all these wonderful classical things, the
Oh yeah, we've heard that. We've heard him play that for sure.
And I thought, oh, well, this guy can play the keys, so we need a keyboard player, but how's he going to play bass and keys at the same time? So I thought, well, I guess I'll have to play bass, and then Peter can play the keyboard, Mike can play the rhythm guitar, and Mickey can play the drums, and we'll have a four-piece combo. And so that's how we did it. And I don't regret it, but I was advised by Bert and Bob, or especially Bert Schneider, he said, don't play in there with them. You should be behind just listening and criticizing and working on what they're doing. But I said, yeah, but I don't know, it just didn't sit. I guess I just wanted to play because I was a musician mostly in those days, and I would do it differently probably today, and but who knows? So,
what kind of bass did you play on the headquarters sessions?
I think I played my double cutaway Gibson, or sometimes, and then I played a Fender bass.
Let's run down. I'm going to run down the tracks that are on the albums, and if you can give me a little something, if you remember on each one. You Told Me, Nesmith.
You Told Me. That was kind of a, well, that was the first thing he played for me, I guess, or for us, and so I think that's one of the first things we did in the Headquarters album. And he just had it together on the guitar, and Mickey put a drum part in there, and I did my bass, and it was pretty easy because Mike knew the song and he knew how to carry the rhythm for it, and so that was pretty easy to do. So that's why we probably did that first.
I'll Spend My Life With You, Voice and Heart.
Right. Now, Peter had a great little intro for that always, I thought, wow, this is pretty cool there. And just the way his 12-string pick and kicked that off. And I thought, well, this is a good one. It was one of my favorites. Some of the things were mellower. If I had it all to do again, I would be looking for more rocky kind of songs. I wasn't particularly into heavy metal or hard rock. I was a pop kind of guy, and coming up from folk music. So I would never been in a rock and roll band. I briefly in the Turtles, and I got a chance to rock out with them. But those kinds of songs like, Stepping Stone just didn't come along at that point. I was hearing whatever, Shades of Grey and Sunny Girlfriend, which was Michael's thing. That was more of like a country kind of a deal. But, I would always thought, well, it'd be nice if we'd have had a few more real rockers on there of some kind. But hey, it is what it is and was what it was. So there you go.
Forget That Girl. That's a Douglas Farthing Hazelwood track.
Yes, my real name, which
ruined by My Three Sons, Chip Douglas, right?
Well, yes, Chip Douglas. That some guy once told me. He said, "Oh, your name is Chip Douglas. Then you must know Fred McMurray." What? No, Fred McMurray played the dad, So anyway, right. But no, that sort of ruined my little stage name, which I just thought I changed that in high school. And then I thought when it came down to putting a credit on that Headquarters album, I thought, well, what'll I do here? And so I thought, I'm just going to use my full and legal name. So people always ask me now, say, well, how come you have two names? I said, it's a long story, but after a while, I used to get so much, not static, but, people couldn't pronounce my name very well, and they still don't to this day. It's Hattelid, and everybody says Hatfield. And if I spell it Hattelid, they say Hatelid, and I don't like that. So when I played that song, at our meeting at the Beverly Hills Hotel for Don Kirshner. He said, well, what have you got? And I said, oh, and at the time, the only thing that I said, well, I wrote this song, and again, I wrote that as advice to myself because the girl that I was just crazy about from high school for many years after that had another person in her life, and I just knew that it's never going to work out for me. So I wrote this song, Forget That Girl,
Sounds
and it
familiar.
was advice to myself. But when I played it for Don Kirshner, he said, he looked at me and says, kind of has a negative message, don't you think? And I said, well, I don't quite know what you mean, And he says, well, it's a negative thing, Forget that girl, and yes, for a pop hit, you want a song that's gonna, say you and me, baby, for together forever, kind of a thing. And so,
Well, I thank you for that song. It was very important to me growing up, and I'm glad it's on the album. And I think it was a slice of reality. It's a real emotion that people go through, and I love it.
well, thank you.
Band Six.
Band Six was,
Band Six.
isn't that the one that's just it's the slow version of the Looney Tunes theme song, and then it goes
Right.
faster?
Right.
That was just something Mickey was doing one day. It was just a chaotic moment. Mike was playing that on the steel, and Mickey happened to be doing his own thing, not paying the least bit attention to what Mike was doing, and just playing a drum beat that was totally unrelated to what Mike was trying to play slowly on the pedal steel. And then I think I may have suggested, I said, well, why don't we work this out, and then I'll say something, and we'll see if that's a funny interlude. So we did that, and it became Band Six. I think you got it now, Mickey. Wow! Da 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 da.
I think you got it now, Mickey.
But that album, Headquarters, it may not have the best, rhythm, drum, bass, R&B sounds in it and all of that, but there's a charm to it, I guess. Just
I think that's the word. I think that's the perfect word. It's got a charm and an intimacy and an honesty that is just unique to it of itself. I don't think the Monkees revisited that communal recording type environment ever again.
Well, I was just really lucky and happy to be part of it because we it was a labor of love. I always say that we got together, we really wanted to do it, and we were having fun and making progress and doing things and creating things right there in the studio on the spot, which we were fortunately able to do because Screen Gems gave them, was it 6 weeks off, I think, from the show in order to make this album. After we finished the album and it came out, I expected, to wake up one morning and, look at the newspaper on the corner and there'd be big headlines that saying, the Monkees play their own instruments at last, and son of a gun, there was nothing, no mention of it anywhere. And I thought, oh, well, it wasn't as big as I thought, but, it did well, fortunately.
Well, in retrospect, as the legacy endures 50 years later, it has become a very important moment and turning point in their career. So maybe it wasn't what you thought the public would react to then, but it became, in their history, it became a very seminal moment in their musical history. So I think it did bear out to be a very important move. And it's very much recognized today as Pinocchio becoming a real boy moment in their lives, in their career.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
You just may be the one.
You just may be the one. Again, that was a Mike song, of course, and I remember hearing that when Michael was working with Bill Chadwick at the Troubadour. So I knew that song just from seeing them do it. And there was the great high harmony on that, in the chorus of it. I saw when you walk by, and that whole thing. And Bill Chadwick had that real high voice like Mickey. And I thought, well, what are we going to do? We got to get it. So Mickey sang that part, and it worked out great. I think Bill Chadwick was kind of up for Mickey's part in the series, and it fell to Mickey eventually. But yeah, that one, and Peter played bass on that, and if he were alive today, he'd be glad that I mentioned this. he kind of wanted to be the bass player in the group because that's what he did on stage, but yet we coerced him into playing the keyboards on a lot of things, and I would play the bass, so just so that we could do things as a four-piece again. So,
did you work with Bill beyond that point?
Bill Chadwick played rhythm guitar on Pleasant Valley Sunday, as I recall.
Shades of Grey.
Shades of Grey. That was an interesting one because we had the only other two people who were not with the Monkees, besides me, an official Monkees member, Vince DeRosa and Fred Sikora, I believe his name was. He was on the cello, and Vince was on the French horn. And we did it live with those guys, the track and the whole deal. And just for something different, we wanted to do it all together. And then Peter kicked it off with that intro of his. And so that's how I think Davy might have been singing a guide vocal somewhere in the room. Can't remember exactly, but that's how we went about that one.
Another standout track that even made it to the first Monkees Greatest Hits compilation. I Can't Get Her Off My Mind.
Yes, now that was, who wrote that? Was it Tommy and Bobby, or?
I believe it was.
Davy wanted to do it. I mean, this is one of the demos that came along, and so Peter, we listened to the demo, and Peter came up with a little piano part for it, and so we just... a
pretty little ditty, as Davy would say.
A pretty little ditty, yes. And that's how we did that.
For Pete's Sake, which, again, is another standout track, famous song for the Monkees.
Yes, that... well, I was going up to Peter's house to hang out in the evenings and have dinner and stuff and talk about songs, and just it's kind of like a little comfortable family environment for me, just because there were some close friends, and we'd sit around and smoke this and that and play music and talk about stuff. And Peter had that song, which is, he had a roommate at the time, a guy named Joey Richards, that I believe he wrote that with, who had kind of come up with some of the lyrics to it and the melody, and Peter did as well, and they kind of collaborated on that. And so Peter would play that up at his house a lot. And I thought, well, let's get in there and do this one. So we did. That's how that one came about.
Mr. Webster.
Mr. Webster, yes. That was, we thought, oh, this is cool. This is kind of a haunting little thing. So Mike had a little steel guitar part figured out, and Davy pretty much was carrying it on the tambourine, I guess, with the rhythm. And Mickey played.
There was no drums on it.
I guess there weren't, were there?
No,
I can't remember what
so.
Mickey was playing on that.
I'm going to tell you something interesting about that song. I was watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents not too long ago. Remember that series?
Oh, yeah.
And there's an episode, I don't remember the title, but it stars Dick York.
Oh, yeah.
Darren number 1 from Bewitched. And it's some kind of caper that takes place in a bank. And two of the characters in the show are Mr. Webster and Mr. Frisbee.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well,
very surreal. I'm wondering if Tommy and Boyce and Bobby Hart I mean, it's too coincidental, or I don't know what to make of that, but it's true.
Well,
Look
that
it up.
may have been the inspiration for the song, or the other way around, or the song was the inspiration for the.
Well, I think the episode was from '62 or
Oh,
'3.
okay. So, well, I would have to say definitely that has to be the inspiration. Like George Harrison, I heard him say one time. He said, "Well, you pinch a little here and there," and uh, so that's where ideas come from, and they're out there. And if somebody gets influenced by one, then it winds up being modified and in some other kind of piece of music or whatever.
Well, you heard it here first. Sunny Girlfriend.
Sunny Girlfriend, that was Mike's song, and again, he had it all worked out on the guitar, so it wasn't hard to do that. All those songs that somebody knew how to play and sing, just one person, then it was pretty easy for the rest of us to chime in there and do our parts, the backup parts to it. So that was one of Mike's ones.
A lot of these could have been singles. I mean, it's amazing that this album did not have a single from it. Do you have any idea who made that call and why?
Well, I remember Lester Sill telling me it was Lester Sill's call. They always felt, or he told me one time, he said, "Well, we hang on to the single to put in the next album," and I thought, oh, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. But in the case of Headquarters, well, you had a TV show that sold the album because you could put the songs in the TV show and it would
Right, that's a good point.
help sell things. And because of that TV show, that those songs keep selling. I'm quite amazed.
Well, there weren't too many pop bands at the time who had a television show to plug their records. Yeah, so they had an advantage in that
I'm
way.
amazed there haven't been more rock and roll shows of bands like that, based exactly the same formula as the Monkees.
Zilch.
Zilch. Zilch. Well, that was just something they started ad-libbing, I think, as it went down, and then I thought, well, let's put it down on tape because this could be useful for something, just for the fun of it. Let's just do this a little bit, and I don't know how they worked it all out. I just remember, I think Peter started it, didn't Mr. Davalin, or
Yes,
was it Mickey?
yes.
No,
Peter yeah.
started it, and I guess it was just made up on the spot, and I guess Peter must have been telling the story of how he was in an airport, and he heard this voice coming over the intercom, Mr. Davalina, Mr. Bob Davalina, and it went from there, I think. And so,
Yeah.
and
So the Cold Gems Brass was okay with it, right?
well, we put it together. I said, here, what do you think? Is this, will this work for one of the tunes? And of course, for them, the executives, it's always the whole deal with, well, how many tunes can we have on this album that we have to pay the publishing royalties on? Because each song, if you go over 12 songs, well, then there's, how many tunes did Headquarters have on it? I should know because I produced it, but I've forgotten now. I haven't, but
14.
14, yeah.
So Band 6 and Zilch are the bonus cuts. So
bonus
speak,
cuts, yes, and they have to. The record company has to pay the mechanical royalties fee on those tunes when they release something. So I don't think they were happy about it, but I think we insisted, or someone did. So
well, if you buy a digital download, Zilch costs just as much as Pleasant Valley Sunday.
Yeah, so there you go, the business, the record business.
No time.
A bunch of friends that were Monkees people that hung out, and they had a each guy had his own following, and so they all got together and put the backgrounds, and everybody said, no time at all. And so it was a whole big deal there. It was a jam session, I think, as I recall, that just needed to have some lyrics put on it. I
Right.
think, and so that's what happened, and we had this wonderful. Well, actually, Going Down was that one too, and that was on the other Pisces album, but that was again a jam session as well. With
Well, the writer credit went to Hank Sicalo on No Time, I believe, as a gift for his
right,
tenacious work on the album,
yes,
right?
it did, and so that the other one was yeah, Diane Hildebrand wrote lyrics on that.
Early Morning Blues and Greens, that's a Diane Hildebrand song.
Yes, and
One of my favorite tracks on the album, by the way.
mine too. I just like the way that turned out, and I always, like George Harrison says, and I will confess, you pinch a little here and there, but there was a great jawbone sound on a Cal Jader record that I always liked, and I forget what the name of the record was, but it started with a kind of a watchy wada with this, and it was an instrumental, and there was this jawbone sound in deep echo that was on it, and that's what I wanted to get that into Early Morning Blues and Greens, just because I thought we need something in there, and I had always loved that jawbone sound on that Cal Jader record. So, yeah, pinch a little here and there. And that's where that idea came from. It wasn't something I said, oh, let's put a jawbone in there but I was familiar with that sound from somebody else's record. So that's how it gets used in the next project.
And to me, one of the standout tracks, again, which was a hit single in England, which proves that there were hit singles on this album, Randy Scouse Kid. How did Mickey bring that to you, and how did that become such a wild production?
Well, he got all when he got back from England, of course, and fallen in love with Sammy, his future wife, and I don't know if he married her while he was over there, or they got married in California. I can't remember, but
Yeah, they got married in July of '68 afterwards.
he had met the Beatles and all of that, and so those are the four kings of EMI, of course, and he just was writing this episode. When you're on the road, you get lots of ideas, and as opposed to just sitting around at home. So that was a whole story for him, and he had a whole concept. He said, no, I want to start with this kettle drum and da 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 da. And I remember giving him a little static on this. A kettle drum? Now, are you sure you want to do that? And I was arguing with him about that, but eventually I just said, okay, we'll just do this, and then we'll put on it what you want, and we'll see what it sounds like. And so I eventually just backed off and said, okay, let's do it how you want. And that's what a producer is supposed to do anyway.
Do you have any idea who chose or how the title Headquarters came to be?
I believe that title was thought up by Bert Schneider and Bob Rafelson, and based on the four guys, putting their heads together, there came the title. So that's the way I remember it. I think it was Bert and Bob.
So what do you think was more important to the guys as you knew them, doing the television show or making a record and recording the music?
I think they all enjoyed the television show. That was their principal line of work, and that's what they were doing for a living. And the recording was part of it as well, of course, but in the headquarters sessions, that became very, very important to them, and they wanted to prove that they could be a band, and which they did.
What did you think of the television show?
Oh, I love the show. It's funny, you know. I love to watch it.
There was I guess the glass partition between the control room and the studio itself that became a mural with psychedelic paints and so forth. Do you remember that during the headquarters sessions, and who started that?
I think perhaps maybe Mickey did. It just became a daily thing when one guy wasn't working on a vocal and had some time to kill. Just spent time painting the mural on the glass. And then the executives from RCA came in one day, and they flew in from New York to specifically listen to the album, which was had been going on for 6 weeks in that studio, and they wanted to know, well, what do we got here? Which was going to be a different album because the boys were doing it all by themselves. So they came in, they were very nice, and they looked at the mural and went, oh, look at this. I can't exactly remember what they said, but I'm sure they were shocked. I think they left some open in the middle so that we could see what was going on. It wasn't completely closed off as I remember, but I don't know if there's a picture of that mural now or what.
So what did the brass think of this? Who were the people that came? Do you remember?
Oh, the only name I remember is Norm Rakusin, who was the president at the time, I believe. And there was the vice president, I think, and perhaps somebody in charge of marketing, and I don't remember their names, but they all showed up one day in their suits, and we shook hands and said hello, and we played the album back. It was being played back on a 4-track, so it wasn't mixed yet. I turned the volume knobs on the individual speakers in the Studio C to mix it for them. So, you know, I knew what needed to be brought up where, and so I went through the whole album.
So you were adjusting it live during the playback for their listening pleasure.
Exactly. So that's exactly what I was doing, and fading the endings out with all 4 knobs at once and all kinds of stuff.
Wow. Why don't you give me a quick little assessment of each Monkee? You know, if you had to put your description in a time capsule, describe each guy for me from your perspective.
Well, Peter was quite the musician, and he could folk pick, you know, the guitar, which was important to me when we were doing things. I thought, well, this, you know, you got to have somebody that does the picking here and there, and the lead work. Nobody was really a super phenomenal lead guitar player like you see nowadays. I don't know, what are some of those names in those big heavy metal bands, and they're just all over the guitar. Nobody could do that in the Monkees, but Peter in particular could do these little folk picking riffs, and was really quite, had great rhythm on the guitar and a great brain, and we would have discussions and sometimes turning into arguments, but he was quite the intellectual, you know, and could really talk about love to discuss a great many things, and very opinionated about this and that, but a great guy, you know. Mickey, as I said, one of the greatest clowns that ever came to television, and just I still, when I think of him doing some impression where I think he's impersonating Groucho Marx. He has a fake mustache on and a cigar in his hand, and I forget what the episode was, but I think of that all the time. I just have a picture of him doing that, but he could make the faces, the Jerry Lewis faces, you know, and all kinds of stuff, and could sing way up in the clouds, as we know from listening to Pleasant Valley Sunday. He's just way the heck up there. How he did it, I don't know. And I think he can still do it in person. I haven't seen their shows lately, but I guess they still do the songs in the original keys, but,
Still cranking.
he's still cranking, yeah. Although they've had a little time off now, they got to re-crank themselves to get back out there and do things. But Michael, quite the writer, and the smarter guy never lived, and he wrote some great songs. They turned out, my son always told me, he said, "Oh, of all the songs in the Monkees, Mike's are my favorites," and he had great stuff that he, and still does, that he writes, and so, and then Davy. Davy, can't say enough about him.
You were personally closest to Davy, weren't you?
Well, in the latter years I was, yeah. Starting with the 70s, Mickey and Davy and I would hang out a lot, and we would occasionally try to do things in the studio, and there's some of those tapes may have wound up as B-sides on some of the Monkees stuff. There's a thing that I discovered quite recently, just within the past year, called Bright Sunny Day, that was written by a guy named Harold Jones, who was coming around the Sunset Strip, and when I was hanging out with Davy at Davy's manager's place, and we went in and we did a recording of that, and I went and I kind of put that together and mixed it down. Most recently, I discovered it on a tape that I had the multi-tracks to it, miraculously, that still survived. And I added some background voices to it, and I forget what else, and it sounds terrific. It would have been such a wonderful single, and if John Hughes is listening and could ever get that as a bonus track, that song got such a great message for today. It's called Bright Sunny Day.
In this world of ours, there's too many unhappy people. No chance to stop and take life easy. They live their lives out in frustration. They don't take time to stop and notice. Baby, it's a bright sunny day. Baby, it's a bright sunny day.
That would have been Davy's obvious follow-up to Daydream Believer. It was done in the 70s, but there was no record company then. And so we did this tune, and okay, what do we do with this now? And here we are with no record company, nobody interested in the Monkees anymore. And this is, mid-70s. So there it sat for years until I finally kind of rediscovered it only about a year ago. And I thought, well, heck, this thing sounds great once it's finished up, and I had no way to kind of finish it in those days, but I put some terrific background voices in it with a friend of mine, John Hoke, and it's one of those great things. So anyway,
you did a track with Davy called Rainbows, which eventually got released not too long ago. How did that one come about?
Oh, that was that was a song that I had heard that he was coming to visit, so it's a fine song, but that's why I did it. I thought, well, Davy's coming to town, maybe I'll write a little song for him, and we'll put that together. At the time, I was pretty much into country music, so it had a bit of a country feel to it. And
let's jump back to 1969. After you stopped producing them, you did come back into the picture in 1969 for Steam Engine. Steam Engine was eventually used as a Saturday morning rerun replacement cut. So how did that come about?
I always think of myself in those days as a novice songwriter, but I just had ideas, and I grew up on a sugar plantation, and where they had old steam trains in those days. So I thought, well, here's an idea. It was a period piece. Here's a guy in the 40s, and he's trying to get the engineer to slow down so he can get his girlfriend off the train. Anyway, it was just an idea I had. There's a verse to it that if I could ever get the multi-tracks on that and get Mickey to do the missing verse, which I never did finish at the time, which was the wrap-up verse, which goes, Mr. Engineer, let's get one thing perfectly clear. I got to get my baby off your train before I go completely insane. And that's the missing verse, the third verse. We just repeated the first verse, but I would love to get Mickey in some studio someday. Maybe next time I get to LA, I can get him to just sing along on some... I think I have instrumentals of this, and we could pop the vocal in there.
That would be extraordinary.
Andrew Sandoval would have to help because he has the multi-tracks of all those things.
And then that was an independent release that you put out also, right? That's the first time we heard it on a record anyway.
I can't remember how that came out the first time. I guess it might have been. I mean, the track is owned by Screen Gems, or it's co-owned. It should be co-owned by me and Screen Gems because they charge me for half the session costs because I had a bunch of brass players in there and everything, and I spent, $5,000 recording this, and it was after the Monkees, and there was nothing to release it on, and they were not too happy about me spending all that money, and I wasn't really on board as a producer. I was just on my way on my last days. It was my last farewell. So I got charged for half of that, the session costs, which wasn't a big deal. And, it came out of a future royalty check or whatever. But, that's how that came about. And so eventually it came on we got into a Missing Links album, I guess.
Yeah, so you squeezed one more Monkee track out of them before they split.
Yeah.
Finally. Well, Peter left first. Do you remember, did you discuss it with Peter at the time? Or do you recall any of what was going on at the time that Peter left?
I kind of was disappointed, of course. Oh, what are you leaving for? The things are still going, and we could still do more tunes. But no, he wanted to do his own thing, I guess, and he got, again, tired of having to compromise with other people about what he wanted to do. So he left. And but all things must pass, like George Harrison said. So, nothing lasts forever, although Mike and Mickey are still making a go of it on stage anyway. So, and in recordings, when John Hughes decides that, we need another album of some sort, they'll go and do something. So,
did you see the Monkees movie Head at the time?
I did. It was an interesting experiment. I don't know what I thought of it at the time. It was a psychedelic dream, I suppose. There you go.
Where did you see it? What was the circumstances?
I probably saw it in a theater at the time, and I saw it subsequently years later at in a Head reunion, and I'm not sure I'd have to see it again. I probably love it. At the time, I was bewildered by it, but.
Well, so were most people.
I guess so, but anything they...
Do you think the Monkees should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Oh, of course. It's ridiculous that they're not. The thing that's hanging them all up is the fact that they don't have a real hard rock album where they're playing all their own stuff, I suppose, that
Yeah, but neither did the Supremes, and they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of
Yeah,
Fame.
right. You know, they sold a lot of records, so they should be in there. There's no question about that. I mean, they were a phenomenon, you know, and a first of its kind, a TV show about a rock group that lives together. And what could be cooler than that? You know,
I
it's
agree.
so
And it influenced a lot of people. Do you think there's a similarity between the Monkees and the Beatles? I mean, would you compare them on any level?
uh certainly, I mean, they wrote songs and they they sang together and they harmonized together, which was to me my best contribution to the whole deal was I could figure out harmony parts for them to do. And that was what I always wanted to see on their records was harmony parts.
Well, you really brought to the fore the wonderful blending of Mike and Mickey on things like Sunny Girlfriend and Pleasant Valley Sunday Night. I mean, that's a standout sound to the records that I believe really started with you.
Yeah, I wanted to see them. You know, the edict was you got to play your own our own instruments, but more importantly, the only people you're going to hear singing is Mickey, Davy, Peter, and Mike, and there's going to be nobody in the background that's except for a couple of tunes that is not them. But I love two-part harmony, and I guess it's just my country roots, and I just love that sound when you got a guy who's singing a high harmony to the melody guy. And it can be a high harmony or a low harmony, but essentially to me that's just the most exciting sound. And you hear that a lot on the Beatles. You know, the John and Paul harmonized well together and, you know, complemented each other perfectly. If Paul was singing a high part, John was singing the low part beneath that. And once in a while, there would be a three part with George in there too. And but that's I guess it's the influence of the Beatles is what led me to try to get more harmonies on the records with the guys, and especially an exciting high harmony where the high harmony vocalist is up there real high like Paul McCartney could do, you know, and Mike could do that and Mickey could do that. So by comparison, you know, there are some similarities, I would say, you know.
Did you hear the Good Times album?
Truthfully, you know, I haven't really listened to the whole thing. I I may have. I listened to a couple of cuts, and you know, it's something I wasn't involved in, so I wasn't. You know, I have my own stuff that I'm totally involved in nowadays. Mostly putting together a pedal steel guitar album of some of my arrangements on that instrument. I've been doing that for years, so. We're rolling on Little Grass Shack, take one, and a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3. I'm not all that familiar with Good Times. I have the album. I'll have to listen to it in its entirety. And
if you got the call to work with them again now, would you jump or would you be?
Oh, sure, I would love to. You know, I mean, I love those two voices, Mike and Mickey. There's that's all we got now. But there's essentially still an electrifying sound there if you can put it on tape. I have listened to some of the stuff they did. To tell you the truth, I couldn't tell who was singing. I didn't know if it's Mike singing lead, but it sure didn't sound like him to me. I thought this doesn't sound like Mike. And I don't know if that's digital modification or whatever was done with it. I really don't know, but it just it it didn't sound like the sound of the Monkees to me, you know, where you really, I don't know, I have a certain sound that I have always loved of theirs, and you can hear a Mike Nesmith vocal when you hear it, and that was my impression. I didn't know who was singing what. I saw him live at the Troubadour not too long ago, just by himself, and he sounded just like Mike Nesmith always sounds. And I've talked to him on the phone. He doesn't sound any different in his speaking voice. So, I would imagine he'd sing the same, but I don't know.
All right, so I think the most recent monkey-related project that you've done is Christmas Time Once More, which were some old Davy Christmas tracks that you refurbished and re-recorded the music to, right?
Exactly.
You have some guest vocalists on that you overdubbed. Who were they?
Well, primarily his daughter, Annabelle, who really kind of revived the project and wanted to sing on White Christmas and Silent Night in particular. And I got her to do a couple of vocals on some other backgrounds that I think it was, Rocking Around the Christmas Tree. She wasn't as comfortable doing backgrounds as she is as a lead singer, and she's a beautiful singer. I mean, I have a hunch I could crank out a few hits with her if she had the desire, but we'll see what happens. But I spent, 4 or 5 months remixing that. Every day I was going over there and trying to get it to sound better, and just going through the vocals, bringing up low notes that you couldn't hear, and I would go through each track, and I was able to do that digitally, where I could bring out the lead vocal, where it may not have been as predominant in certain places in the older version, because I wasn't able to do that. But that was
well, I think it did a seamless job. I mean, I think it sounds like a modern recording that was done all under the same roof during the same era.
Well, thank you very much.
I really thought you deserved a pat on the back for that project, and I think you did a great job, and I was very pleased.
Well, thank you.
That it was such a nice tribute to David, and like you said, he sounds great on it. It's some really touching performances.
Well, thank you very much.
And I think Christmas Time Once More is a great track.
Thank you. That's we went through that, and my friend again, John Hoke, he had some suggestions as to there was a certain bluesy harmonica lick that we kind of left out of there, and got a little flute part in there to put a little more of a, I don't know, call it a hook if you must, but
yeah, that's beautiful. That little, I really think that added a lot.
Yeah, and we didn't have that before, and I didn't think of it then. So, that did wonders for that song. That I love the way that came out.
I agree. One more question before we go. The Monkees were accused of not having any talent. I laugh at that statement. What's your defense of the Monkees' talent?
Oh, they had loads of talent. I mean, David Jones, to begin with, could sing and dance, and I mean, some of his on-stage things are so great. He's famous for that, playing the Artful Dodger in Oliver, and he was so great in that. I mean, he just smoothly went right through his sequences, and it was great. I mean, that takes real talent to do something like that, and he had a voice, and he wrote numbers of songs, all of which I have in my archives that probably no one has ever heard, that were great. And so, and Peter, he wrote and he played the heck out of the guitar and was a good actor as well. And Mickey, of course, with that voice that goes up into the clouds, who is also another talented writer who writes some funny songs and just all kinds of. He had one song called "Jesus Saves in the Bank of Heaven." Get in line to verify your claim. As he waits at the golden window, stand in line and everybody sign your name. And I don't think that's ever made it to a recording, but he never had verses for it when he used to play it for me in the 70s. But I always said, this is great. Let's get this on an album. But anyway, if I ever get involved again, I will explore more of those original songs that I've heard that no one has heard out of those guys, mostly from Mickey, because he's the one. And Mike, of course, great songwriter, great singer, great guitar player. What can you say? And perfect in his part as an actor for the series. A lot of talent there. A lot of talent, So.
Yeah, the Monkees changed your life?
Oh, definitely. I don't know. Would I be working in a gas station? Probably now, or whatever I'd be doing if it hadn't been for my involvement with them. I owe everything to the Monkees, really, and I mean, it's well, to a lot of people.
And I just want to say that, yes, you owe a lot to the Monkees, but the Monkees owe a lot to you because you produced some of their greatest records, 2 of their best albums, and the fans owe a lot to you because we love their music and the records you produced, and we're still listening to them 50 years later. So that I can't imagine anything making a producer happier than to know that his music is still loved 40, 50 years later and into beyond.
Well, thank you. Yes, it does. It is. Thank you very much, Joe. That does make me very happy. And I don't hear it all that often. But thank you so much.
That concludes part 1 of my interview with Chip Douglas. An upcoming episode will feature part 2, in which we delve into the Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones Limited sessions. I'd like to thank Gary Strobel and Henry Diltz for some of the exclusive archive photos used on this episode. Special thanks to Michael Pomerico for his technical assistance. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Thanks again to Chip Douglas. I'd also like to send a shout out to our friends over at the Zilch Monkees Podcast and also the Monkees Live Almanac website. Thanks for watching and see you next time.